are discussing issues relating to quarries and deleterious materials. And we are joined today from the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage by Mr. Feargal Ó Coighligh, Ms. Sarah Neary and Mr. John Wickham, and accompanied by Mr. Eoin McGrath from the Geological Survey of Ireland. You're very welcome. From the National Standards Authority of Ireland, we're joined by Ms. Geraldine Larkin, Mr. Enda MacDonald, Mr. Seán Balfe, and Ms. Yvonne Wild, and you're very welcome too. And then from the National Building Control and Market Surveillance Office, we are joined by Ms. Mairéad, Phelan and Mr. Richard Butler. And you're all very welcome. I thank you for your submissions that you provided to us in advance. And before I ask you to make your opening statements, I'll just read a note on privilege. I remind members of the constitutional requirement that members must be physically present within the confines of the place where the Parliament has chosen to sit, namely Leinster House, in order to participate in public meetings. For those witnesses attending in the committee room, you are protected by absolute privilege in respect of your contributions to today's meeting. This means that you have an absolute defence against any defamation action for anything you say at the meeting. Both members and witnesses are expected not to abuse the privilege they enjoy. It's my duty as Chair to ensure that this privilege is not abused. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks. It's imperative that you comply with any such direction. Members and witnesses are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Now, I'm going to go in the order of opening statements. I'll go with the Department first, then I'll go with NSAI, and then I'll go with the National Building Control Office. So, Mr. Coighligh, I invite you on behalf of the Department to make the opening statement, please.
I'd like to thank the committee for the invitation to attend today's meeting to discuss issues relating to quarries and deleterious materials. My name is Feargal Ó Coighligh, Assistant Secretary in the Housing Policy, Legislation and Governance Division. Today I'm accompanied by my colleagues from the Department, Sarah Neary, Principal Advisor in Building Standards Advisory Unit, and John Wickham, who is Senior Advisor in the same unit. I'm also joined by Eoin McGrath, Senior Geologist in the Geological Survey of Ireland. I just maybe want to give some context to how materials are considered within the overall Irish building control system. So the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage has policy responsibility for the implementation of the EU Construction Products Regulation. This regulation sets out rules for the marketing of construction products to facilitate the free movement of such products within the EU. In order to achieve this, construction products for which a harmonised European product standard is in force or for which a European technical assessment has been issued need a declaration of performance from the manufacturer. The product must also be affixed with a CE marking before it can be placed in the internal market. There are approximately 450 harmonised standards published covering a wide range of construction products, including concrete blocks, aggregates for concrete and hardcore. In order to affix a CE marking, most construction products require the intervention of a notified body. Notified bodies are designated bodies that carry out third-party tasks, typically being product certification bodies, factory production control certification bodies and testing laboratories. The degree of intervention by a notified body in the placing of a product on the market is set out in the relevant harmonised standard. Under the Construction Products Regulation, notified bodies must be established in a member state and be designated by the member state notifying authority for performing the specific tasks in relation to specific technical standards. The Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage is the notifying authority in Ireland. The National Standards Authority of Ireland, NSAI, who you will hear from shortly, has produced additional guidance for some harmonised standards under the Construction Products Regulation in the form of standard recommendations known as SRs. These set out appropriate minimum performance levels for specific intended uses of certain construction products in Ireland. In relation to quarries, SRs outlined the precautions to be taken in a quarry. This includes the requirement for a geological and petrographic assessment of the raw material, i.e. the quarry deposit, and of the finished aggregate product for use in concrete and concrete products, and for that to be carried out at regular intervals. The key objective of the geological and petrological examination is to determine if aggregates for the manufacture of concrete products are fit for purpose and if deleterious materials are present in such form or quantity that may affect end use and performance. The SRs also require third-party oversight of the manufacturing process by a notified body such as the NSAI. Ultimately, the manufacturer is responsible for compliance with the Construction Products Regulation and in particular for the declaration of performance and CE marking of the construction product he or she is placing on the market. This requires having full knowledge of the raw material and having regard to the end product's suitability for use in construction works in accordance with the relevant SRs published by the NSAI. Whilst the Construction Products Regulation concerns itself with conditions which apply when placing construction products on the market, specifiers, designers, builders, certifiers and end users should, when drawing up specifications, refer to the harmonised standards and specifically to the performance requirements of the individual characteristics for the particular end use as outlined in the NSI standard recommendations. Make sure they review the manufacturer's declaration of performance and check that the performances declared are in line with the standard recommendation, and ensure all works are carried out using proper materials which are fit for the use for which they are intended and for the conditions in which they are used to ensure compliance with the building regulations. Related to this, the Department also has policy responsibility for the market surveillance of the construction products covered by the Construction Products Regulation. The aim of market surveillance activity is to ensure that non-compliant products are identified and taken off the market, with unscrupulous and/or criminal economic operators prosecuted and penalised for their actions. In this context, it is important to note that the overarching objective of a market surveillance authority is to ensure that products that comply with the provisions of the Construction Products Regulation are placed in the market. Where non-compliance is identified, market surveillance activities are designed to ensure economic operators take appropriate corrective actions to address the position within a reasonable period of time. In Ireland, each local authority is a market surveillance authority. In addition, in 2020, in order to strengthen the market surveillance functions, the National Building Control and Market Surveillance Office, a local authority shared service hosted by Dublin City Council, was appointed as a competent authority for the carrying out of market surveillance functions for all related construction products on a nationwide basis. And Margaret Phelan from that office will address you shortly. The National Building Control and Market Surveillance Office also has enforcement powers and supports the 31 local authorities in the state in carrying out market surveillance functions. In its early years, the work of this office has concentrated on construction products generated by economic operators from quarries and pits. Market surveillance authorities have significant powers, including to obtain access to the place of manufacture or storage, request technical information, select samples of the construction product, carry out evaluations or examination or tests on such samples. Where construction products are placed in the market which do not comply with the requirements set out in the Construction Product Regulation, market surveillance authorities have powers to direct the relevant economic operator to take the necessary corrective actions to bring the product into compliance. Where this does not work, there are further procedures that may result in the product being withdrawn or recalled from the market, its use subject to special conditions, or the products available on the market being prohibited or restricted. The committee will be aware of the issues which arose in Donegal, and in particular in relation to the audit which the Minister has requested and the report which was published today. Just the background to that. In its role as notifying authority under the Construction Products Regulation, the Department received a notification from the NSAI on 15th of October last year regarding the withdrawal of a certificate of conformity of a factory production control for aggregate concrete masonry units from a block manufacturer in County Donegal. On foot of this notification, the Minister requested the National Market Surveillance Office, in partnership with Donegal County Council and with the support of Geological Survey of Ireland, to carry out an audit of all quarries in Donegal to evaluate relevant economic operators' compliance with the Construction Products Regulation when placing relevant construction products, aggregate concrete blocks and/or aggregates for use in concrete products on the market. The Minister received this report on the 30th of November and he published it this morning, and the committee may wish to raise issues in relation to the report. To conclude, the Department is committed to continuing to support the National Building Control and Market Surveillance Office and the Market Surveillance Authorities with the implementation of the National Market Surveillance Strategy 2022 and the implementation of adequate controls on a risk assessment basis to contribute to a safer marketplace which ensures a high level of protection of public interests. While much work has been undertaken to strengthen the regulatory framework to ensure that products from extractive industries comply with the provisions of the Construction Products Regulation, the Department acknowledges that there is more to do in the context of the finding of the audit report, which has been published, and the broader public programme for government commitments. So to conclude, I wish to thank you again for inviting the Department here today, and my colleagues and I are happy to address any questions that you may wish to raise.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Quigley, and I'll move now to Ms. Larkin on behalf of NSAI, please.
Coighligh members, I'd like to thank the committee for the invitation to assist in its consideration of the issues relating to quarries and deleterious materials. My name is Geraldine Larkin. I'm Chief Executive of the National Standards Authority of Ireland, NSAI. My colleagues, Mr. Seán Balfe, Head of Sustainability in the Built Environment, Mr. Enda MacDonald, Director of Standards and Metrology, and Ms. Yvonne Wild, Head of Standards Technical, and I are here today to assist the committee in your work and to address any questions you may have. My comments in this context will address NSAI's work in supporting businesses in the construction sector to comply with the regulatory frameworks. NSAI is the Irish national standards body, was established by the NSAI Act of 1996 as an agency under the auspices of the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. It's the national member of the international and European standardisation organisations, ISO, IEC, Sinn and Senelec, and also a provider of certification for statutory and non-statutory schemes. We have a broad role that creates the infrastructure for products and services to be recognised and relied on worldwide. The benefits of standardisation and use of standards are well recognised. Standards have been found to create efficiencies and mitigate risk. Standards facilitate elimination of trade barriers and assist in establishing market and consumer confidence. Standards also play a significant role in supporting Irish government policies and legislation. Standardisation of construction product is a core NSAI activity for which we have a strong reputation. NSAI facilitates stakeholders representing all aspects of Irish life to build consensus on standards needed for their sectors in the development of national, European and international standards and related guidance documents. We are supporting the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage in the EU Construction Products Regulation, the CPR acquis. This establishes the essential characteristics for construction products for incorporation into harmonised technical specifications. To support the application of the CPR in Ireland, we published the Harmonised European Standards, or ENs, as Irish standards, and have produced additional guidance to some of those ENs in the form of standard recommendations, or SRs, for specific use of certain construction products in Ireland. Of the suite of standards addressing the design of masonry structures, EN 771 is a specific standard series relating to the specification of masonry units generally, and IS EN 771 Part 3 deals specifically with aggregate concrete blocks. In relation to this standard, NSAI has published SR 325 on recommendations for the design of masonry structure in Ireland to Eurocode 6. This provides guidance for particular situations as regards durability for finished work and the use of Category 1 aggregate concrete blocks in buildings. Therefore, Irish block manufacturers are required to have third-party oversight of their factory production control by a notified body. Category 1 aggregate concrete blocks should therefore meet the prescribed density and compressive strength of ISEN 771 Part 3 previously mentioned, and be made with dense aggregates conforming also to ISEN 12620 on aggregates for concrete and Irish Standard Recommendation 16 of 2016 on guidance on the use of ISEN 12620. Given that aggregate is a key constituent of aggregate concrete blocks, SR 16 also outlines the precautions to be taken in the quarry to reduce the risk of harmful impurities in aggregate production. On the other side of the NSAI, in relation to the NSAI certification role for the construction sector, we are a notified body designated by the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage with a scope of activities related to quarries. NSAI operates a number of schemes for construction products which can apply to quarries. The three most common are certification to ISEN 12620 on aggregates for concrete, ISEN 771 Part 3 for concrete blocks, and ISEN 13242 on aggregates for materials for use in civil engineering work and road construction. In conducting audits of manufacturers, NSAI's role as a notified body is to assess and audit the manufacturer's factory production control system, followed by annual surveillance visits. The scope of the certification process relates to the manufacturer's capability to produce compliant products. The factory production control system is the permanent control of production exercised by the manufacturer. By drawing up a declaration of performance, and by also affixing the CE mark, the manufacturer takes full responsibility for the conformity of the product with its declared performance. NSAI's work in standards and certification for the construction sector is essential for the value it brings to citizens and business in everyday life. We play an important role in this sector, and I can assure the committee of our commitment through this important work to support the construction sector. And together with my colleagues, I'm available to answer any questions that the committee may wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Larkin. And I'll now move to Ms. Phelan, please. And Ms. Phelan, I notice your submission is a 22-page submission, but it's just the opening statement, it's just the first few pages. Okay, just wanted to check that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's just the opening statement,
okay.
And the other is just for reference only.
Thank you.
And I'm Mairéad Phelan, and I'm head of the National Building Control Office, and I'm here with my colleague Richard Butler. And just to set the scene, really, in 2019, the National Building Control Office was set up as a specialist shared service business unit hosted by Dublin City Council, and the office provides oversight, support and direction for development and standardisation of building control in the state. The office is also responsible for the National Building Control Management System, and that's for the administration of building control in Ireland, and they have approximately 158,000 users of that system, with all the commencement notices, fire safety certificates, disability access certificates, etc., online managed through it. In 2020, we were set up as the National Market Surveillance Office, and this was also a specialist shared service business unit hosted by Dublin City Council. And the office, with the support of the national competent authorities, that's the general, the GSI and TII, coordinates market surveillance of construction products activity in the 31 building control authorities, who are also market surveillance authorities. The office develops and manages the implementation of, in consultation with all of the stakeholders, Ireland's national market surveillance strategy. And we have the first strategy we did was the National Market Surveillance Strategy 2021, which is published on the EU website, and we are almost completing the 2022 National Market Surveillance Strategy, also published, and I have the links there for them. So an advisory committee with membership from the 3 regional building control authorities, which represent all the local authorities in Ireland, the Construction Industry Council, the National Fire and Emergency Management, the Chief Fire Officer Association and the Department, which is chaired by Richard Shakespeare, who is the Assistant Chief Executive of Dublin City Council, on behalf of the 31 Chief Executives, manage the shared services offices. So the office, together with the 31 market surveillance authorities supported by the competent authorities, carry out reactive and proactive market surveillance under the EU construction products regulations in the state. And these regulations, they prescribe the obligations on the economic operators, the requirements for marketing of construction products in the EU, and the market surveillance procedures to be followed, and the powers conferred on building control authorities, who are also market surveillance authorities, as I've said. And we just have to realise the primary purpose of the construction products regulations is to break down the technical barriers to trade and ensure the free movement of construction products across the member states. So that's the real purpose there, and I have given you a link there to frequently asked questions on this. So it actually does this, and my colleague from the department has already referred to it, by setting out a system of harmonised standards, over 450 of those, and agreed attestation and of confirmation, verification of constancy, and my colleagues in the NSAI have spoken about that. The framework of notified bodies, mandatory CE marking of construction products. So the Construction Products Regulations was given full effect in the state on the 1st of July 2013, with the result that each construction product for which there is a harmonised standard, that's known as a HAN, or a European Technical Assessment is in force, must be accompanied by a copy of the CE marking that enables the construction product to move across the EU member states, avoiding new assessment and certification, so it can be made available in any of the EU 27. A valid declaration of performance, which provides information on performance obtained using the assessment methods provided by the applicable harmonised technical specification, and it must also be accompanied by the instructions and safety information relating to that product. So in the context then of construction products, market surveillance does refer to the activities carried out and measures taken by market surveillance authorities, of which there are 31 plus ourselves plus the competent authorities, to ensure that construction products comply with the requirements set out in the Construction Products Regulations and therefore do not endanger health, safety and any other aspect of public interest protection. The other important thing to note is that given the commercial sensitivities that may be involved, it is incumbent on all market surveillance authorities to take reasonable measures to guarantee the confidentiality of the technical documentation that we do look at and such other information that may be supplied to us as market surveillance authorities by an economic operator under these regulations to support the compliance of the product. It's the responsibility of the economic operators, according to their respective role in the supply chain, to ensure compliance with the relevant legislation and to fulfil all the appropriate conformity assessment obligations. So it's the responsibility of the economic operators. And market surveillance authorities are required to perform appropriate checks on the characteristics of products on an adequate scale by means of documentary checks, where appropriate physical and laboratory checks, and when doing so shall take account of established principles of risk assessment, complaints and other information, including the National Market Surveillance Strategy. So where economic operators present test reports or certificates attesting conformity issued by an accredited conformity assessment body, market surveillance authorities, they must take due regard of such reports and certificates. Just it's important to note that the Market Surveillance Authority does not and should not issue a compliance statement which may be seen as endorsing a product. So when assessing the compliance of construction products, the Market Surveillance Authority may choose to consider the relevant legislative requirements and do a full compliance assessment or a partial compliance assessment, and that will depend on the risk assessment. So we look at formal compliance, which is checking the administrative requirements, documentation, markings, etc., and or technical compliance, and that's testing the essential characteristics for compliance. Construction products, they may have very different intended use in buildings or civil engineering works, and it's important to recognise that, and they may fulfil different performance requirements. So construction products, it may be compliant with the requirements of the Construction Products Regulations, but it may not satisfy the requirements of the building regulations. That means it must be fit for the use for which they are intended and for the conditions in which they are to be used, and that's what was alluded to by my colleague here in the department as well. And so a responsibility does lie with the project designer and end user to correctly prescribe the product to be used in the specific construction project, and to the end user or the purchaser, so that the prescribed performance for the specific intended use is checked and incorporated in the design. So really what we're saying that the end user must check the CE markings, the DOP, the safety information used to ensure the construction product is fit for the intended use. And it's very good guidance given by the department in a guide to the marketing of aggregate concrete blocks, and that's on their website, and it gives designers, builders and owners and end users their responsibilities. It outlines it. So as I said, the other thing that we have to recognise that in Ireland the economic operator must take into consideration the national provisions, and that's the standard recommendations, and we've already alluded to those. So as part of our strategy and our market surveillance strategy, we've looked at the construction products that relate to SR16, and that's aggregates for concrete, which are used in ready-mix concrete blocks, precast concrete lintels, floors and walls. SR17, which is used in bituminous products, aggregates for roads, and SR18 is the aggregates for mortar, and those are the products, the aggregates that are used in mortar plastering, internal plastering and external rendering and floor screeds. SR21 is another aggregate for use in civil engineering works, and we looked at that as well. And that's the aggregates that are used for underfloor fill and for under roads and under footpaths. And then we looked at it in the context of SR325, which is the Bible in relation to the design of masonry structures in Ireland. Masonry structures are the structures which are constructed of concrete, aggregate concrete blocks, concrete floors, lintels, and anything that's made of concrete. And that's the standard design for masonry in Ireland. So each individual construction product manufactured to a harmonised standard has a specified threshold level of performance for given essential characteristics of the product. And these are set out in the Annex ZA of each harmonised standard. So in the context of what I've spoken about so far, the National Market Surveillance Programme 2001, we've completed that, and we're progressing the strategy for 2022. And I've set out what we've actually done on page 11 there in the table. So overall, the office has carried out inspections on 163 aggregate-related inspections, 58 reactive inspections. We've tested 150 samples of aggregate and aggregate constituent products. We've issued 86 requests for information to economic operators. We've taken 9 corrective actions in relation to all sorts of different products other than aggregates. We've recorded 71 inspections in the European Union. The ICSMS is the portal for recording inspections across the European Union. We have assessed 76 RABEX notices and carried out the market surveillance audit on foot of in Donegal on foot of the request for the Minister. The approach that we use is a good practice methodology set out by the European Union, and I have a link to that there. And that we had some key learnings from our programme so far in our strategy, and the key learnings really is that this office needs to drive the programme, the promotion of compliance with the construction products, and continue to do what we're doing. And through industry engagement, education, enforcement, and resourcing of the market surveillance of construction products in Ireland. So, we're here to answer any questions, Richard and I.
Thank you very much, Ms. Phelan. And I think it's quite clear from the opening statements, plus the time that this committee spent on the defective lock bill, that this is a highly technical and complex matter, and the range of standards and guidance and technical guidance and regulations and inspections that are out there seem quite comprehensive. And I think what we would like to know in the committee is that what we saw and what we heard from people living with mica impacted homes across Donegal and Mayo and other counties, that the regimes and inspections and checks are in place now, that we don't see that happening again, because there's a considerable suffering for people living in those houses, a considerable cost for people living in those houses, and a considerable cost on the state to rectify it as well. And I think that as legislators, well, for myself, I would like to know that all those checks are in place now, so that we don't have a repeat of that in the future. I'm going to move now to the members, and it was suggested to me, Deputy Bryn suggested, because it is such a technical piece of work we're looking at, we might extend the speaking sessions to 10 minutes so that we can cover in depth. It will still leave us time for a second round, so if members are okay with that, I'm going to suggest that. And of course, you don't need to take the 10 minutes, but the 10 minutes is available. So just for our witnesses, the 10-minute slot is for the questions and for the answers. And we can get written answers if you don't feel you have the information to hand to answer them at the time. So I'll go first to Senator Fitzpatrick. You're going to take the Fianna Fáil slot first. 10 minutes, please.
Gordon August, Chair, and thank you all for your attendance here at the Joint Oireachtas Committee. It is highly technical. I suppose I come at it from the more the human side of it, and I don't envy you your task, and I hope you can help me with mine. The damaging effect that the whole mica situation had on individuals and on their homes is just devastating and can't be overstated. And then in terms of the construction sector generally and the damage to confidence, let's say, in it. So really do appreciate all of the work that you have done to date. And as the Chair indicated, I suppose what we would like to come out of the committee with is even greater confidence that going forward people can have confidence in the construction sector generally, but in the materials that are being used. And I say, and we talk about these materials, concrete, it's hopefully a product of the past, but it's still being used in every building site today in the country. So I have a number of questions for you, and I suppose a lot of them are about the new organisation that has been set up under Dublin City Council on behalf as a shared services function for the 31 local authorities. And I'm fairly certain I heard you say that you have responsibility for the technical compliance, for the formal compliance of the construction products. But are you explicitly excluding operational compliance? Is that what I heard from your statement? That's my first question.
So is that right?
The market surveillance. Ms. Phelan, sorry, excuse me, Ms. Phelan.
The market surveillance of construction products is set out in the construction products regulations, and we verify the technical and the formal compliance. The operational compliance is a matter for the factory production control certification system. Okay,
that's what I thought I heard, and I just wanted to be sure of that. And then in terms of the national building control and I recognise that the inspections that you've undertaken, the 48 reactive inspections, am I to read from that there's no proactive inspections?
The proactive inspections are set out under the National Market Surveillance Strategy, and they are listed for the construction products that we target each year.
Okay.
And they're carried, that's specified by risk assessment, yeah. Okay,
and how many of those were carried out?
We carried out 156 of those.
Okay, great. And then in terms of the enforcement and prosecutions, does that fall within your remit? I know you can direct, but if they don't comply with your directions?
We request information under Section 11 of the Construction Products Regulations, and then there are times we have to request corrective actions, and issuing an Article 14 corrective action, and all of the corrective action notices that we issued have been followed through, and the product either taken off the market or brought into compliance. If that doesn't work, then we refer to the Minister to take the product off the market. Okay,
so it is fair to say that there is 100% compliance where, is that an accurate statement, where you've identified issues?
All cases. All the cases of engagement where we've engaged in corrective action, we've either brought the product into compliance or the product has been taken off the market. So we have been quite effective in that respect.
And can you explain a bit to the committee about your resources and the amount of, I suppose, engagement that's required to achieve that level of compliance? Like 100% compliance is very impressive, and
colleague Richard Butler.
Okay, Mr. Butler.
Well, I suppose we're a small office. We've 6 of the staff, 4 technical people, and Mairéad, and 1 non-technical person to cover the country.
To what do you attribute your success at achieving 100% compliance?
Well, I don't know whether you can say that you've achieved 100% compliance. It's always someone going to get through the net. So it's not we just have to be vigilant. And the formal compliance is easy because it's a paperwork check. Technical needs to be tested and verified by testing. And that can take a time period to get that done.
What sort of time period is involved?
Well, you're dependent on laboratories and that to do the testing. So it's really...
And what happens in the interim? Is the product suspended? While you're going through that testing process?
No, because it's really checked to see if the product is compliant. So we're assuming that the information that the manufacturer
has and the test that they had is compliant, because they've gone through the process of factory control process and all that, and drawn up the declaration of performances at CE marking.
And how long does that process take, roughly?
It could take between a month to 3 months, depending on.
Okay. Okay. And then another question, and this actually is to do more with the building control. That it was this actually is to the department. Sorry. Back in 2015, the regulations for the opt-out, for new single dwellings in the building control regulations of 2015, that opt-out facility, has that been completely removed?
So yeah, SI 365 allows for an opt-out from certain parts of what's known as the BCAR system, or the building control processes that were introduced in 2014. And that is for one-off houses in a single unit site.
And that is still in place?
That is still in place.
Okay. And was it reviewed?
So as part of ongoing building control inspections and measures, one-off houses are subject to that. It should be noted that building regulations applies to all works regardless. These are the building control and administrative measures. So they are subject to inspection, and they are dealt with in the same way from a building control process. But a formal review of the levels of non-compliance, and that hasn't been carried out.
Are there any plans to?
Yes, we are keeping it under review.
My understanding of it was that, and I'm trying to think when the report was that back, the report which was done by a previous under the previous government on the concrete blocks, the defective concrete blocks, that there had been a recommendation to actually not just review that opt-out for single dwellings, but to actually review and remove that facility for an opt-out on the single dwellings. Am I correct?
The concrete, the panel that looked into concrete blocks and the situation in Donegal and Mayo did make a recommendation to carry out a review of SI 365 and the impact of that. And as I said, it is subject to the same building control inspections around the country, and there is activity in that space, but a formal review of the differences in levels of compliance hasn't been compiled.
Okay, that's fine for the moment. Geraldine, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator Fitzpatrick. I'm going to move now to the Sinn Féin slot, and Deputy Ó Broin, you're going to take the first slot. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to everybody both for your presence and for your presentations. It's important just to remind us all the kind of impetus for us calling this hearing. You'll all remember when we were undertaking our informal scrutiny of the enhanced effective block legislation. Eoin O'Callaghan from Engineers Ireland gave some pretty shocking testimony to the committee when he informed us that, and these are quotes from his testimony, I do know certain quarries that are still producing concrete blocks and still producing material that is wholly unsatisfactory, and that continue to do it knowing that the material is wholly unsatisfactory. He went on to say that I have other cases where houses have been built in recent years and they are demonstrating damage, and the same material is present in both these properties. Obviously the same material as deleterious materials affecting homes in Donegal, Mayo and elsewhere. He also said that he believed some quarries were carrying out what he quoted as saying side deals with homeowners, as the quarries, quote, recognise they have a problem. And then he concluded his remarks by saying they, obviously being the quarries, are suppressing the information and some of the damage are doing to homeowners. Now, given that we got that testimony when we were considering the defective block legislation and that the working group's report estimated that the cost of cleaning up that mess is 2.4 billion, you can imagine the concern of the committee. And I think really what a number of us are interested in doing here today is just tried to establish to what extent is the kind of testimony that Mr. O'Connell, who's a very respected professional engineer, to what extent those practices are still prevalent in the industry, but more importantly, whether or not the compliance and enforcement regime is fit for purpose, whether it's identifying those cases of non-compliance and addressing it. And look, I really appreciate that this is super technical stuff, right? But maybe treat us like we're kind of leaving cert science students just for the ease of explaining it to us, because ourselves and the wider public out there want to get beyond some of the technical information and into some of the more general kind of processes. Because really we want to understand the system, because I'm still not clear exactly what all of the different roles of your organisations are. And one of my questions, and maybe Feargal is for you, is the department is titled the notifying authority. A range of other organisations are the notifying bodies. We have our building control sections. I want to understand in plain, simple English who is responsible for what in the chain of compliance and enforcement, because I think that's really important for us to understand. The second thing is we want to know how widespread people in this room think these problems are. And I think we deserve, and the public deserves, an honest assessment as to what extent do we still believe quarries are non-compliant. So I'd be really interested to know, preferably from the department, if they have the information, how many quarries do we have supplying the building industry? How many of those are licensed? Because non-licensed quarries indicates a particular attitude to the rules. To what extent are quarries being inspected, and to what extent are those inspections notifying a level of compliance? Does anybody in this room have a picture of what's happening across the state beyond the information that Mairéad and her team have given us? Crucially then, in relation to sanctions, I mean, Mary asked some good questions. I'd like to know how many products have been removed, when were they removed, and are the suppliers of those products still supplying products elsewhere? So maybe if Feargal, if you can grapple with some of those initially, and then I'll pass some questions on to the other witnesses.
Thank you, Deputy. I'll just maybe give some, and I'm not a technical expert myself, but just to give maybe an overall picture. I mean, what Senator Fitzpatrick said about the psychological damage and stress that's been caused, we're absolutely all at IDIM with that. As regards to financial costs to the state, we're all at IDIM with that. And I think it's fair to say, in general, in relation to the building control sector, that a huge amount of progress has been made in the past years in terms of reforming the operation of the sector to make sure it's fit for purpose. And we are, for example, producing houses possibly at the best or up top tier in terms of standard compliance with energy ratings and so on under the current reform system. In relation to the market surveillance and quarries, I'm ask some colleagues to come in on that. You mentioned the licence of quarries. Quarries require planning. It's been a really, really difficult evolution, because many of them are started or purported to start prior to the introduction of the Planning Act in 1964. The 2000 Act introduced rules to get...
Do you mind me kind of cross your Feargal? Because just kind of get our time is limited. Like, does the department know how many quarries are currently operating in the state? Do they know the number of those that are compliant with planning and licensing?
Yeah, but before I get there, I just want to say that this, for example, the Donegal audit that was produced today showed the system working. So the NSAI discovered a problem. Mairéad has spoken about the audits, that the programmatic approach to market surveillance and testing which they're doing. The Minister requested an audit.
Sure.
And the audit pointed out more room for improvement. Obviously, issues with compliance with paperwork is still out there. So there is much more work. There's still more work to be done. In relation to having the knowledge of the number of quarries that are operating in the state at any one time, I'll ask some colleagues to come in on that. But quarries can open and close. They can operate for different products. They don't necessarily all. For example, all quarries don't necessarily provide products for concrete blocks. So you know, it is quite a picture. And I mean, one of the recommendations from the report in relation to Donegal quarries is, for example, a national register. Now, the GSI has some information in that. I don't know, Eoin, do you want to say in terms of what the information that you have on that area?
Well, we keep a quarry register, which was last updated in 2014, and we're under the process of
2014.
2014, correct. And we're in the process of redeveloping that into an online database, essentially, where we can track what quarries are out there and who's producing what. But at the moment, we don't actually have a particularly good handle on the number of quarries across the state, and that really is that quarries open and close in market demand, essentially. And sometimes you get quarries and they're open for certain days a week, or they're open for particular materials, or they're open in response to a large infrastructure project, and then they close after the infrastructure project.
And Eoin, if we don't know the number of quarries and when they're opening and closing, and therefore if we don't know if they're compliant with planning or licensing, how does market surveillance then operate, other than in a completely reactive way, like Donegal, where there's a national scandal and people are sent in after the fact to look at it, like in real time? Because again, I do want to go back to Aidan O'Connell's commentary in terms of a quarry that he was making reference to. Like, to what extent can you reassure us that across the state there is any visibility and therefore proper enforcement and compliance with quarries?
You'll have to ask somebody else about that. For Deputy, I'm a geologist, so I'm interested in the rocks. That we don't have a role in enforcement or planning or anything.
Sure, but you have a level of expertise that you would know whether.
Deputy, might ask colleague
Sarah.
Thanks very much. Look, I suppose where a quarry is producing, or where a quarry is producing a concrete block or aggregates that are covered by a harmonised standard, they fall under the Construction Products Regulation, and that has significant obligations on that operator to create a DOP and to carry a CE mark. So when it comes to construction products, it's a subset of all of the quarries that are in the country producing that, and that's where market surveillance and all of the structures that come under the CPR exist, and that's their realm. So that's a subset. And
sure, and in the second round, I have some questions for the other two groups of witnesses, but I'm just trying to get a sense of at a departmental level, a ministerial level. I mean, it was 2017 when we had the independent report on defective block. It doesn't seem to me that a wild lot has changed. I mean, yes, we have the creation of the National Building Control Office in 2019, but as Richard has said, it's a relatively small office. I mean, for example, can you tell us how many building control officers, full-time equivalent building control officers, are currently operating within our local authorities? Does the department know that? Of those building control officers, how many of them are skilled or qualified in the specific areas that would relate to the discussion we're having here?
I suppose maybe if I could just backtrack a little bit,
But do we know how many building control officers we have? Because the last time I asked a parliamentary question, I was told the department doesn't keep a track of that.
Well, I suppose resources are a matter for each chief executive to allocate
I accept that.
In each local authority.
But given the significance of the 2017 report, given the fact that we are talking about the trauma and the financial cost that Feargal outlined, one would expect the department would have a particular interest in assessing, are our local authorities properly resourced? Do they have the skilled staff to carry out the very important compliance work that you outlined? Do we know any of that? So,
I mean, there are 70 authorised officers
across the state
to carry out this work. I suppose the point being that while the report was carried out in 2017, a lot of work had happened before that. There were kind of key milestones when the Construction Products Regulation came into effect in 2013, all the work that was done on the standard recommendations, which basically bridged the gap between what came from Europe in terms of standards and what was, giving additional guidance as to what was required in Ireland in order to meet those standards. And so all of that work, a huge amount has been done in terms of guidance to economic operators and builders and specifiers and all the stakeholders in the construction industry. And in parallel, the the local authorities' role in market surveillance then was strengthened through the additional role of the NBCO and that kind of leadership and coordination and upskilling and training of building control officers and market surveillance officers. And it is a work in progress.
Sure.
There is more to do.
And I accept that. And again, like I say, I have questions for the other organisations in the final round. But so in terms of the department's view, and in light of the testimony, albeit about a small number of cases that Aidan O'Connell gave this committee before, is it your view that we have a small problem, a significant problem, or a widespread problem in terms of non-compliance across the state?
So I think what we have is a report from the NBCO, Donegal County Council and Geological Survey.
I will come to that because that's the report, but just in terms of statewide, do we have any visibility in terms of what the level of compliance or non-compliance is across the state? Or does the department have any visibility on that?
Well, I think the audit report is an indication of what's happening in one area, and Mairéad may want to elaborate on the national picture. But what that came out, what the findings of that report show that there are issues with paperwork and omissions and formal non-compliances.
Absolutely, and Mairéad made the point. But my question is, does the department, other than the Donegal report, have any visibility, or can you give this committee any comfort that, in your view, compliance outside of Donegal, where we have that one report, is high, is modest, is poor? Because again, it's just, we get testimony from one engineer who has significant experience in this field. We don't want to overstate that testimony or understate it. So I'm just kind of wondering, as the notifying authority, what visibility does the department have of what's going on across the state?
And we rely on the NBCO, and the reports from that have shown that while we certainly need to remain vigilant, and there are formal non-compliances, but that the level of inspection is high out there. And that
how do we know that if we don't know how many quarries we have?
Well, I think Mairéad has indicated the level of inspections that she's carried out.
Absolutely, but to say the level of inspections is high, we would need to know the total number of quarries and then the total number of inspections. I'm not hearing anybody tell me that we know how many quarries versus inspections. Richard?
Yeah, just in relation to the quarries, not all quarries produce construction products that fall in under the harmonised standard. We have about 80 block manufacturers in the country. We have about 208 that actually are certified for SR16, EN 12620, and about 300 to do the SR21, which falls in under EN 13.
What was that last number, Richard?
13242.
The number of those?
308.
308. And just in plain English, and again, apologies, the 208 and the 308, what do they actually do? Those businesses, those quarries?
Aggregates.
They both do aggregates?
Yeah. But they that might be the same quarry for all three, or they might be. And
so of those, do we know the percentage that have been inspected, for example, either by your own office or by local authorities in the last 12, 24 months?
When we commenced the work on the 2021 market surveillance strategy, we did a very extensive desktop study on where every single hole that produces aggregates or rocks in Ireland was. We looked at the EPA's website, we looked at the GSI's, we identified something like 1,800 what could be termed quarries. Of that 1,800, 500 of those were actively producing products, some of which are not construction products. And of that then, for as part of the 2021 market surveillance strategy, we probably visited 20% of those. And we identified the main producers of the aggregates which go under floors, the aggregates for blocks, lintels and concrete. And we are progressing.
Because I'm running out of time and the chair is going to stop me, so I'll ask one question, but I will return to this. Of those 20% that are inspected, how would you rate the level of compliance? High, modest or poor? I know that I'm trying to simplify it, but...
I would say moderate at the level. The technical compliance from our testing is within that set out in the construction products regulations. The formal compliance, the paperwork and issues like that have to be addressed, and we're working on that.
Does that mean you're saying that the products that are producing are okay, in plain English?
The products,
the administration and paperwork surrounding those is weak?
The products comply with the standards, and the paperwork does need a moderate bit of work, which we are progressing under the 2022 strategy, and we will be under the 2023 strategy, resources permitting.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Deputy Bryn.
I'll come in a further round, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Now, the next slot is, I will go to, it's a Green Party slot, so I'll take that slot next. And if I could ask, Mr. Coighligh, in your submission, you talk about, there on page 4, the you received notification from NSAI on the 15th of October regarding the withdrawal of a certificate of conformity. So if, and that was NSAI referred that to you. So if we could just go through that process there. So how did NSAI become aware of this non-conformity of this product? I'll put that question to NSAI. Or non-conformity of the factory production control, to be precise.
So, beg your pardon, on an annual basis, as part of the of our ongoing activity, we audit each of the manufacturers against the requirements. At that juncture, we established that the manufacturer was not able to demonstrate compliance with the factory production control.
Okay, so you would go to each one of these production lines or factories across the country, and are they random inspections or are they timed inspections? They're... So
as a notified body, yeah. We're engaged on a contractual basis, okay, by the manufacturers. So right, so they in effect are clients of the NSAI.
They submit to you.
They submit to us. So they submit to us initially to be registered in the first instance, yeah, and then annually thereafter, our team of auditors visit and audit again against the requirements. So it was part of one of those annual audits that this was reported.
Okay, and then so this this supplier submits to you their paperwork or their processes or their testing that they do, and you looked at this and you said this product does not conform with the standard that it's meant to. Do you then go back to that producer and say you need to make changes to this, or do you immediately flag that to the department? Is there a process there? Because I realise when you do compliance checks, you can have a lot of non-compliance, but they can be very insignificant non-compliances, or you can have a very, very significant non-compliance.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And this, I might just call on my colleague Seán Balfe to go into the detail, yeah, of
I think
of
that would
various...
help people watching and listening, yes, to understand this process and give us confidence.
Thank you, Geraldine. I think your question was, when we carry out an audit, did you say we don't find that the product is non-compliant? We're auditing the factory.
So I want to just refer to this example here that's in the department's submission, that on the 15th of October there was a withdrawal of a certificate of conformity based on notification from NSAI. So I'm trying to talk through the NSAI process to get to the point where you inform the department there's a non-conformity here, and then I want to go to the department and ask them what the steps are taken after that. So,
yeah, the company failed to demonstrate to us that they had a factory production control system in place that was capable of producing a product that would consistently conform to the declared values on their declaration of performance.
Okay, so the production control process is what you had, yes, the issue. Yes. So then you contacted the department and say, one of these producers that send us results, we question the conformity of the production control process, and therefore the product coming out at the end may not be meet standard.
May not be, yes.
May not meet standard. Yeah. Okay, so it's flagged to you.
Yeah.
And then it goes to the department. And what steps do the department then follow from receiving that notification? And just that time frame for it as well.
Yeah, so under Article 53 of the CPR, the notified body contact us in relation to withdrawals of certificates. At that stage, we then contact both the National Market Surveillance Authority and the relevant Market Surveillance Authority, the local authority in that area, to alert them to the fact of that a risk may occur. In this situation, because it was concrete blocks in Donegal, the Minister requested an audit to be carried out on all concrete block manufacturers in Donegal, given the sensitivities and the historic situation.
Okay, so that's understandable. So, do either of you have concern that concrete blocks produced by this producer then are not to standard, or is it just that you just question the process that's there at the moment? Has the product been tested fully?
I think as a result of the market surveillance exercise, the product was tested and it was shown to be...
and the product was shown to be complete. Yeah. Okay. And then this company is then told you have to modify your process control here, and then we get your certificate of conformity back. Is that the way it works?
Yes.
Sorry, yes, Mr. Butler, please, yeah.
No, so the department then notified us as the Market Surveillance Authority. We immediately issued a 14.1 corrective action notice to the economic operator, informing them that it didn't have a factory control certificate and therefore they couldn't sell the product under the CPR regulations. And then we worked with the manufacturer. We visited. We actually went and met with the GSI and took samples, and eventually they went through the whole recertification process with NSAI and got their cert back.
Okay, and then for NSAI, just in relation to concrete products as we're dealing with at the moment, how many entities out there do you get that audit from, or that control documentation or proof that we're conform? How many of them are in operation?
NSAI currently certify for aggregates for concrete. We have 168 quarries, which is 95 manufacturers.
168.
But we're not the only notified body operating in the state.
Sorry, explain that to me. What do you mean?
There are a number of notified bodies. Any notified body in Europe, essentially, that's notified for these harmonised standards can certify a factory here in Ireland.
Okay.
So NSAI is one. I believe we're the largest one, and that's the figures we have.
So you've 168 and 95, 168 quarries, 95 concrete product manufacturers.
168 quarries, sorry, and that's 95 companies operate those 168 quarries.
Okay. And then you're not the only notifying body, so do we have an idea then in total how many there is in the state? If there's others going through a different process but for the same audit, is that it?
Well, the department might be able to.
Yeah, so sorry, we're the notifying authority, so we're responsible for actually designating notified bodies. So there's an application process. So we've got 10 notified bodies in the country at the moment, and 3 technical assessment bodies, of which NSAI is both a notified body and a technical assessment body. But I think in terms of concrete blocks, the NSAI are one of the few that carry out factory production control for concrete blocks.
Okay, I'm finding this quite complex. I don't know if anybody else is as well. Okay, I'll have a think about it and come back to further questions on that. The SI 365 that Senator Fitzpatrick referred to, the SI 365, I think, is it? That's the opt-out for one-off rural housing. And that makes up, I think, somewhere in and around a quarter of the housing that gets built every year in this country. So I do think it would be wise to... I know I can guess why the opt-out was requested. I suppose if somebody's building a one-off house, the consideration is it's for them to live in and it's not to be sold on as a product, and you're not going to have that chain of issue there. But I do think that it is something that should be considered probably with a little bit more urgency than I'm hearing. Okay, that's grand. That's my questions for the moment. Thank you. I'm going to move on now to Deputy O'Callaghan, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to everyone who came in. So just to follow on from some of the previous questions, just for the National Building Control and Market Surveillance Office first, you were talking about technical compliance with products being high. So just in terms of the number of quarries that were inspected, what percentage of those quarries did you find that they didn't meet the standards? And I mean in terms of, substance, technical non-compliance, product non-compliance, and, significant non-compliance, not in terms of the paperwork. Around about what percentage? The National Building Control Office and Market Surveillance Office. Yeah.
Other than the three economic operators we spoke about, the withdrawal of the Factory Production Control Certificate, all of the tests we carried out for the essential characteristics, they complied with the requirements of construction products regulations. So the answer is other than those
just three out of every. Okay, thanks. Now, in terms of the testing process and what happens when the product is found to be non-compliant, there's been a lot of detail done on that so far. My question is, what happens in terms of people who've previously bought that product, used that product in construction? Does the quarry or the producer of the product notify them? Is there any follow-up with them? Is there any testing of homes that have been built with products that is found to have been non-compliant in terms of its material? What happens in that respect?
Part of the correction action notice requires the economic operator to carry out due diligence, and part of the certification process is a traceability, where they must keep records of who they actually sold that product to for the last 10 years, and they must carry out that due diligence and check. And they also check their tests as well. All of those, they carried out due diligence and checked their previous tests, and along with that, this office would have had examples or samples of their construction products that we tested previously as well, and we were satisfied they were correct.
Okay, so they keep a record of who they've supplied to, but there isn't necessarily any follow-up with who they've supplied to. They're not told there could be a problem.
They're told as part of the corrective action notice, and the economic operators actually carried out that due diligence.
Okay, so if I build homes and I got a product from this quarry and it's found to be non-compliant, as part of the corrective process, me as the house builder, I get notified of that. Is that what you're saying?
So each manufacturer has obligations under Article 11 of the European 305, which basically says that they have to carry out the appropriate actions in maybe recalling or specific legislation. I don't have it to hand, but...
Okay, and do you check as part of the process for them to be, for the product to be recertified or for them to meet compliance? Do you check that they've done all that? Or yeah.
So if they have to go through a whole, if we found something and they made to change their process, they may have to go through their factory control certification, and that would be going back maybe to NSAI or other notified body to do that corrective action. Plus they would have to do all the type testing that's required for the product as well, if it was a product issue.
Yeah, so to try and understand it in another term, if I'm a homeowner and I've bought my home from a builder who's used this product, which has been found through your inspections or testing that the product that's gone into my home may be defective, will I, as a homeowner, find that out? I take it not from what you're saying, but the person who built the homes will find out that there could be a problem, and then it's up to them whether or not they want to notify the purchaser, the homeowner, or do nothing at that stage. Is that correct, or have I understood this wrong?
They will have carried out testing, consistent and constant testing, weekly, monthly, every 6 monthly, on the construction product that they produce, and have the records of those available that they've placed on the market. With the withdrawal of these certificates, there was an inconsistency in the factory production control in that the source material, the constituent aggregate for the blocks in question, wasn't that as specified in the factory production control. So the factory production control certificate had to be changed because the source material wasn't as specified in the certificate. So it had to be recertified for that purpose. But in any event, all of the testing that was previously carried out was available to us. They carried out due diligence and checked their stockpiles that they may have there for a couple of months. And we have a certain percentage that we have checked ourselves that we can go back and check on. And they also have the records of who they sold all the products to. So if they find a defect, then they may have to recall it.
Okay, and has that happened in terms of the work that you've done?
That hasn't been necessary.
That hasn't been necessary, yeah, but it could happen.
That could happen.
Okay.
That would be worst scenario, but that could happen, and the process is in place for that to happen, and the checks and balances are there as part of the testing required for the factory production control certificate procedure, and they must have all the records.
Okay, thanks. Now, just in terms of the very serious statements that were made by Eoin O'Callaghan at this committee earlier this year, and Deputy Ó Broin read some of those out. Just were the substance of those statements investigated? What was the outcome of those investigations?
On foot of the previous statement, yes, those actual specific statements were investigated. The economic operators were inspected, tests were carried out, but they also formed part of the 2021 market surveillance campaign and the 2022 market surveillance campaign, and there was no non-compliances found with regard to the specific economic operators that were that this statement was made about. We've checked that rigorously.
Okay. In terms of a question just for the NSAI, just about the withdrawal of certificates of conformity, and just how many of those have there been under the construction products regulation?
We have, I think, had up to 12 different ones for different construction products, ranging from steel to lintels to other products areas for different reasons, and a lot of those have actually been taken off the market in any event.
And that's since the market surveillance office is set up, which, how long is that? That's
2020?
18 months, really.
18 months, so it's been 12, yeah. And then just in terms of economic operators, have there been any that have been prosecuted or penalised for their actions? The NSAI referenced in their statement that can happen, so I'm just wondering, has that happened, or if so, how many?
We just have taken
that is a question mainly for the NSAI, but yeah. But don't mind you helping as well. But.
I'm sorry, Deputy, can I just clarify in terms of your question?
Sorry, I thought I took that from the NSAI statement about economic operators being prosecuted or penalised, that can happen.
No, Deputy, that's not a role for the NSAI. Our role finishes with the withdrawal of the certificate.
Okay, sorry, maybe I took that from the National Building Control Office. The National Building Control Office, just want to ask in relation to if there's professionals working in the construction sector and they come across the use of defective materials or have concerns about that, is there any requirement for them to report that, or any mechanism for them to report that if they become aware of it?
If they become aware of it, on our website it's support@nbco.gov.ie, and we will take all of any queries very seriously and investigate it, and we have done that, and professionals have brought specific products to our attention that may or may not have warranted.
But there isn't any requirement on anyone working in the sector to do that?
There's an ethical requirement.
An ethical requirement?
There's an ethical requirement on all professionals. If they see construction products or any products or buildings that are not in compliance or there is an issue with health, safety or welfare of people, they should bring it to somebody's attention.
And in the case of where a professional in the construction sector may sign confidentiality clauses with whoever they're working for, their clients, does that inhibit them or?
That's outside the scope really of I couldn't answer that one.
You can, yeah, okay, yeah.
Also, they can report it to all the 31 local authorities also.
As well.
There are market surveillance authorities in their own right.
Yeah, and then just finally, and if there's time, Chair, I wouldn't mind getting a view from all three, the Department, NSAI and National Building Control Market Surveillance Office. But just, you know, is it your view that the processes around this are sufficiently strong and robust, and is there areas that could be improved or need to be improved, and if so, what are they? I might just start with the NSAI and then the department on that, if there's time, Chair, and if not, we can return to it.
Thank you. From an NSAI perspective, I'm satisfied that we have an annual check on all of those manufacturers that are registered with us in terms of their factory control, their production process. Obviously, that's at a point in time, and the criticality relies on colleagues in the National Building Control Office and throughout the course of the year. So I suppose I'm satisfied that we have an annual check, and but that annual check is part of an overall system that relies on all of the checks and balances that we've described here today.
But you feel the overall system is robust enough?
Yeah, from the basis of the findings that we've made and the actions we've taken. Based on that, I'm satisfied that the system over the past number of years, because of the number of standards that I outlined earlier, because of those coming in from Europe, the additional requirements that we've placed in from an Irish perspective in terms of the application, the requirements indeed for a notified body to come in and certify product before it goes on the market, together with the market surveillance authorities subsequently, that has built a very robust system from a notified body perspective.
Chairman, from the departmental point of view, you've heard from the NSAI in terms of increasing standards and compliance. We've been on a journey in this country in terms of compliance with building regulations, and I think huge improvements have been made. Even the Market Surveillance Office that was put in place in 2020 has upped the game, and the report that the Market Surveillance Office provided to the Minister on Thursday night has further recommendations, and they are around further awareness, training of the market surveillance authorities, the local market surveillance authorities, and as you can see here today, it is a complex and technical area of work. Training of and awareness in the industry, and I think much of the industry is, the organised industry is aware of the need to ensure that the reputable products are there in terms of continuous professional development and so on. There are the recommendations in relation to additional resources. So those are all things that we need to consider now in the department with the National Building Control Office, and maybe speaking to some of the issues that Deputy Ó Broin mentioned in terms of level of the departmental awareness. We have a monthly meeting with the National Building Control Office to discuss progress across all these fronts, what more needs to be done, where issues arise, where challenges arise. So look, I think this report that we've got, and which was published by the Minister this morning, points to further work that needs to be done in the space along that journey, but on top of a huge improvement that has already been carried out.
Yeah, if there's time for the National Building Control Office, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I would concur, yes, we have a robust system put in place. We have a very good strategy for market surveillance in place, and it is really subject to being adequately resourced, having proper trained, competent professionals available to market surveillance, because it is a very technical area, and building control is a very technical area. And I suppose it's probably the first or second step, and it needs to be strengthened to move forward, so that we will have a system in place that we can actually really stand over, that won't be subject to changes. It's strong. It can monitor verify compliance with construction products regulations, and it's really all about health, safety, welfare of people. So we have a good strategy, we have a robust system, but it needs to be resourced and strengthened and trained with competent professionals to ensure that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to move to Deputy Higgins, please. You've 10 minutes, please, Deputy Higgins, if you record.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to everyone for being here with us today. Apologies, I got the opening statements, but I had to duck out for another meeting. I was online earlier. And I suppose just to thank all of you for sharing your expertise in this area, because this is just such an important topic. First and foremost, because it's about the safety of people's homes. And secondly, because the taxpayer, as we know, have had to step in to compensate people as a result of exactly the issues we're dealing with today. And we can't continue to have a situation where buildings are built with substandard material that endangers people, and that then the taxpayer is also having to step in again and again. We will likely see that happen when it comes to apartment blocks soon too. In terms of, maybe if I start with the department, you spoke an awful lot in your opening statement around market surveillance, and I suppose I just want to maybe understand that process a little bit better. Are the public notified in relation to the findings of market surveillance? Is there a register that people can check as a result of that market surveillance? Do we know, and this mightn't really be a question for the department, maybe it's a question for elsewhere, but how many products have been removed from the market as a result of that overall market surveillance? You talk as well about it being part of a kind of a campaign to encourage corrective activity. How do we enforce corrective activity? And I suppose maybe that's where you collaborate with the other bodies we have here today. I suppose a question both for the department and also for the National Building Control Market Surveillance Authority is, are there, and I know this is something we're all keen to get to the bottom of, and we've had questions about already this evening, but are there, to your knowledge, still quarries producing substandard material in Ireland, or producing content with mica or pyrite in it? In relation to products taken off the market, I'm just kind of struggling to understand from the statements and the reports. Is it primarily that corrective action has been taken? Have products been taken off the market? And if so, how does that work? If something is actually constructed with it, how do you retrospectively do that? And then in terms of corrective actions, is there any trends you're seeing in relation to the reason for corrective actions being taken? I can understand if it's paperwork and the administrative side of things, there probably are, but is there bigger trends beyond that? In terms of the National Standards Authority of Ireland, I'm just wondering, you spoke about the annual checks on registered manufacturers regarding the production process. And hopefully not, but I'm just wondering, are there unregistered manufacturers operating, which therefore could be outside of your scope, or do we feel we have everybody captured in that? So I suppose they're my questions. The first one is around the market surveillance. If I could just get a little bit more information on that and how that encouragement of corrective activity becomes enforcement of. Are we confident that there are not still quarries producing defective material? What happens when products are taken off the market? Trends in corrective actions, whether there's any, and then just that question in relation to the checks, the annual checks on the registered manufacturers. Thank you.
The conversation today, Deputy, has all been about a confidence that the products that are being produced are compliant, and it's not lawful to place products in the market that don't comply with the relevant standards for use in construction in the relevant methodologies. We've heard from the NSAI, from the National Building Control Office, about all the work that has been has been done in recent years to improve standards. And I think we've heard from the NSAI as well in terms of the kind of risk-based assessment that tries from the National Building Control Office, Market Surveillance Office, the risk-based assessment approach. In their early years, they're focusing very much on the extractive industries. We have a report today which makes recommendations for further improvements. We can see that there are issues in relation to paperwork, but we have also heard some, I suppose, positives in relation to anything testing that has been carried out has shown that products have been compliant technically, which is, I think, reassuring. And I think the National Building Control Office has mentioned about products being taken off the market. So maybe, Mairéad, you might want to speak to that again.
Sorry, just in relation to the market surveillance, can you just explain to me how that's carried out and what that achieves from the end user's perspective? Like, is there a register people can check to see what the results of the market surveillance are? How does that information get out?
I'll ask the National Surveillance Office, the Market Surveillance Office, maybe to address that.
I suppose when we carry out an inspection, we put that inspection in the ICSMS, which is the European portal for inspections. There is, I suppose, no national register for construction products that are the subject of harmonised standards in the country, where people can actually check. But you have to check at the NSAI. You have to know the notified body first, and then you have to for your product, and then you have to check that to see are they. I suppose what we've learned from the market surveillance campaign in the last 18 months is that we have upped the ante in compliance, and this is probably the first time that many economic operators have heard of market surveillance. Okay. Now they actually all know we existed. It's like putting the guard on the motorway, and they know that we will come back and we will check, so that they're quite aware of that. The professional bodies that they deal with in the professional geologists, the Irish Concrete Federation and other professional engineers, they all are aware now of what is the requirement. But the good news piece of it is that all of the testing that we did on the aggregate constituents, the aggregate concrete blocks and everything else, they satisfy the technical requirements. So it's a work in progress, and improve and resourcing, as I said, is training, competence, awareness is where we need to go, as well as being on the spot there for reactive and proactive inspections.
So do you feel, I suppose, that now that you have the market surveillance in place, now that we have stronger legislation, that thankfully so far we have had nobody fail the actual kind of production standard, that we shouldn't see a slip in that, because now the regulations are there, the audits are happening, the annual checks are happening, that at this point the culture has changed? Is that a fair statement?
The culture is changing. We have strong legislation in place, and we've always had strong legislation. We've had strong legislation and regulations in place for a number of years. We do need the police on the ground to be there to check, and the economic operators and those producing and building and using concrete or construction products. They need to know that they will be audited, they will be checked, they will be inspected, and there will be consequences for any non-compliances. And that's the message that we're giving out as part of our inspections, and that's what we're doing. We're carrying out information days for economic operators and explaining exactly what we want to see when we go inspect their quarries.
And the corrective actions so far then, what have been the reasons and the trends behind them?
When we get notified whether the factory control cert was moved, or if it was in relation to type testing or something like that, we'd issue a 14-1 informing them not to sell the product because they don't have factory control process, or they may have to. We give them a list of stuff that they have to do, and it's the point of engagement. Then we follow up with a site visit. We engage with the contract, the economic operators, and we tell them how or what they need to do to bring the product into compliance if we can help them at any point. And they may have to go through a re-audit of a factory control process or re-certification to get to that point, to get the product back on the market.
Okay, thank you. And then I suppose in terms of the annual checks.
Thank you. Just to say that the NSAI facilitates the manufacturer putting product on the market.
Yeah, okay.
So the manufacturer must enter a contractual relationship with NSAI. Yeah, okay. So we have 95 clients covering 168 quarries. Those are the 95 clients that we do annual audits with. It's only those that are contracted with us. There are other notified bodies that manufacturers may also choose to contract with. So we have those that are contracted to us. That's the ones that NSAI are looking at on an annual basis.
And that's 95 clients.
Currently we have 95 clients.
Okay.
Sorry, Seán.
I could just add to that. Excuse me. Any of those 95 clients that NSAI audit, they are subject to a rigorous audit annually, and I'm confident that their products will continue to comply with the regulation.
Thank you. Super. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Deputy Higgins. And now, Deputy McLochlainn, please.
There's two excerpts from the opening statements that I want to draw attention to. I think it set the scene for this committee. In the opening statement from Geraldine Larkin, a sentence: the cause of these problems are deleterious materials, which are naturally occurring minerals found in rock deposits in Ireland. So that's the core issue, pardon the pun, that has brought us to this. I think that only the banking scandal would compete in terms of the cost to people and to the exchequer of the state. Billions it will cost. Billions, it's incalculable the amount that we will end up paying because of the regulatory failures in this state. Now, in the opening statement from Feargal Ó Coighligh, he sets the context that what led to the audit was the withdrawal of a certificate of conformity of the factory production control for aggregate concrete masonry units from a block manufacturer in County Donegal. My understanding that that block manufacturer has been referred to is the quarry and manufacturer responsible for the vast majority of defective block homes in Donegal. Can I ask, was that quarry tested as part of this audit? Was there an extensive test of that quarry as part of this audit?
That question is directed
to the NBC MSO.
Okay.
Actually, it's not an accurate statement about the source of the quarry in itself, and the aggregate was tested by the GSI when we got the factory production control certificate notice of withdrawal, and the product was taken off the market while we were carrying out the corrective action or going through the corrective action notice, and it was subsequently recertified with the factory production control certificate.
But it's not the manufacturer.
But it's not the manufacturer you think it is.
Okay. In a recent conference in Donegal, there was a range of international experts that presented their findings. One of them is Dr. Andreas Lehmann, which I'm sure that the panel would accept as an international expert in this area. And in the test that he carried out in a number of blocks, he found that the amounts that would be allowable under EN 12620, that in terms of sulfates, the level were 7 to 10 times the amount in the blocks that he had tested. So that's 7 to 10 times the amount. I'm sure you'd agree that that is absolutely extraordinary. Now, I want to repeat again, there is a quarry in Donegal, which I think is what led to this audit, responsible for the vast majority of defective concrete block homes. Has that quarry been extensively examined, and can you say that that quarry has a clean bill of health today?
Yeah, all the block manufacturers in Donegal were tested as part of the audit.
What was the findings then, specific findings in relation to the quarry, which I think you know what I'm referring to? I won't name them, but I think you know who I'm referring to. What was the findings there?
Basically, it was verified that they complied with the testing that was done.
So you're satisfied that that in terms of deleterious materials that may be in that quarry,
let me clarify. We can only, as a market surveillance authority, we can only test for the essential characteristics declared on the DOP.
Okay.
So deleterious material is not part of the finished product on the block.
Okay, this is extremely alarming. Okay, so what has led to this crisis in the opening statement from Geraldine Larkin is the existence of deleterious materials. That is what's led to one of the biggest scandals in the history of the state, the existence of deleterious materials and the levels that were not in line with established regulation, European and Irish. Now, I'm asking, in terms of the quarry that has led to this audit, has there been an extensive geological examination? The second question related is in terms of the NBC MSO, what geological expertise do you have? What geologist do you lean on to assist with this?
Chairman, I suggest maybe the PSI might.
Yeah, Mr. McGrath, please.
Deputy, could I step in? You're slightly off track there. The quarry in question that led to this specific audit was not the quarry that you're thinking of.
Okay.
It was a separate quarry. We were called on the 17th of October 21 for requests for technical assistance. So as Geological Survey Ireland, we essentially are the state's geologist. So if any arm of the state requires a geologist, much as you call the Attorney General for legal advice, you call us for geological advice. So we went up and we sampled particular stockpiles that were available, one of which was had a certification from NSAI as material for concrete, and one of which did not have certification. The material that did not have certification came back as completely compliant with all the standards. So, and the paperwork which the quarry operators on the ground informed us that they had a geologist report and certification in train, and we did receive that approximately a week later. And the material that was in the geologist report concurred with our own findings.
So just to be clear, and I'm not going to name the quarry, but they've been publicly identified repeatedly. So there's one quarry in Donegal that is primarily associated with a vast majority of defective block. We're talking about thousands of public and private homes in Donegal. Has that quarry, and again, you know what I'm referring to, been extensively examined from a geological point of view to try to understand what has led to this absolute scandal and to prevent anything like that happening again?
We have research projects underway at the moment to try to identify the complete damage mechanism, because we're aware that there are multiple deleterious materials present across most rocks in Ireland, across Donegal and across into the rest of the northwest. So identifying the accurate damage mechanism is key to understanding the remediation options. So that's research that we have underway at the moment, both with the commercial research company and with a proposed consortium of international researchers as well.
Okay. In terms of going back to Dr. Andreas Lehman, and I witnessed, and you can watch it back, anybody who hasn't seen it can watch back, his testimony and the testimony of other experts from Canada, from Norway, from UK, and I understand they're going to be assisting the Geological Society. Yeah, they're going to be assisting you now. So these researchers, everybody accepts, are international experts and people who we want to help us in Ireland. So he has said, Dr. Lehman, that the tests he's carried out demonstrate 7 to 10 times sulphur levels that would be permissible under EN 12620. I'm sure you agree that's absolutely astonishing. Even though that regulation had been in place since 2002, and these tests were on blocks that were manufactured after 2002. So I mean, how can you assure the public that in terms of quarries across the entire state that manufacture that manufacture concrete products as we speak? So all of the manufacturers, all of the quarries, can you satisfy the public that the failings that led to this scandal, the faulty quarries, the faulty products, that they're a thing of the past, that there is extensive geological oversight, so investigations and oversight being carried out, that this won't happen again? Or do we need more people and more work in this area?
Well, in terms of market surveillance, I'll have to defer to my colleagues in NBCO. But so as the state's geologist, we respond to any request from any arm of the state, be it a local authority or a department or our colleagues. And so we're always available to go in on the ground and assess the information that's available, as we have done across Donegal.
And finally then, what's emerging, because the chairperson used the phrase mica crisis. What we're starting to understand in Donegal anyway is that the actual chief offender is pyrrhotite, unfortunately, based on the emerging evidence. How can it be, and it's a question for Geraldine Larkin, how can it be that the NSAI came forward with IS 465 that didn't allow for pyrrhotite to be considered in terms of forming a prognosis, a cure to what has emerged? How did that happen?
I think, Deputy, if we look at 465 the original 465 had two purposes. The first of those was to develop a test methodology to identify primarily mica and pyrite, but in fact the test currently, as it currently stands and is developed by the technical committee, actually does identify the presence of pyrrhotite and other sulfates. So the second part of IS 465 is looking at, well, once you find a deleterious material, whether that's mica or pyrite or indeed pyrrhotite, what happens next in terms of the remediation of the property of the structure. The provisions of 465 dealt with pyrite and mica, because those were at the time that was the scientific information available to us in terms of what was causing the damage. The challenge for us now is to look and understand through the research that has been previously mentioned the extent of the damage that might or might not be caused by these other substances that have now been identified.
Okay. Just a brief supplementary in relation to that. Thanks, Geraldine. Obviously, people are very, very anxious that the current review being undertaken by the NSAI, would lead to a conclusion and give people confidence that they can have a standard that can help them to rebuild their lives and homes. What sort of time frame are you working on to conclude that review and to make strong recommendations to government?
The work on concluding that standard is critically dependent on the research that has been previously mentioned, and that is going to take time. That is likely to take all of, or at least the majority of this year and the remainder of this year and next year. So before the standard is finalised, it's likely to be out into 2024. Now we've committed, because we're hugely conscious of the impact both to all homeowners, to the financial cost of the state, but also to the many professionals that we engage with who are trying to grapple with this issue. So we've committed that if it's possible for us to at any point during the course of the research work to produce interim findings or interim standards, that we certainly will. But right now the timeline that we're looking at is out, will take us out to 2024. But it's not what I want to be able to say to you today, and I'd much rather be able to say to you that I can deliver this to all those affected homeowners next year and early next year with that. That's not the case. The research is going to take time, and we have to be sure that when we conduct this research that we're making the right recommendations to homeowners.
I promise this is the fact. In terms of the issue of pyrrhotite, international evidence is that pyrrhotite can impact even strong concrete structures such as foundations. Right now, it is not recommended that foundations be tested in the likes of Donegal, which is predominantly affected now by pyrrhotite. How can that be? How can there be a recommendation not to test foundations when international evidence is that pyrrhotite can have an excessive level of pyrrhotite, which leads to sulfate attack, internal sulfate attack. The problem right now, there's a sense that the science is catching up with the scheme, and that's a huge concern. The IS 465 that was in place, and I can only speak with authority about Donegal, engineers started to challenge it on the ground, and they started to challenge that they could not with conscience make recommendations. They didn't believe the science was right. Nobody stepped forward to defend IS 465. Nobody defended it. Therefore, it was completely undermined in terms of its credibility. So people are being asked to rebuild their homes, and they're not convinced that the science is right. Indeed, the evidence emerging suggests that the science that supposedly underpins the existing IS 465 isn't right. And that causes me huge concern. So we're asking people, do not test the foundations. There's no need to do that, even though international evidence would say in the presence of excessive levels of pyrrhotite, you really should test the foundations. That's our problem with these timelines. We're asking people to undertake a scheme next year, and they've lost confidence already, and they're going to lose even more confidence unless that's... So that particular issue, I would ask Ms Larkin, that particular issue of testing foundations urgently needs clarified so we can progress.
Certainly, and that is one of the priority areas that we have included in the research, because it's not that we have a recommendation, we have no scientific evidence right now applicable to Ireland, and that's the piece that's really urgently needed. So thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Chairperson. I appreciate your forbearance.
We're into the third round now, so if members do wish to indicate to me, Deputy Broin, you wish to come in, I just want to clarify a point for myself. And again, at the outset, I said, the people looking in want to have confidence that we've got a robust structure of testing and regulations in place so that we don't see this again. So if I just go back to the testing, if somebody... So somebody has to submit their certificate of conformity to NSAI for their product after having run the tests that they run on it. I'm right in that, am I? Or certified that this product meets the standard based on the tests.
The standard will describe a number of tests that need to be carried out, and the manufacturer carries out those tests or has them carried out in a laboratory, and those tests are examined by us over the course of the factory production control.
Okay. And then, is there a kind of a heading like test for deleterious materials? Is that actually set out what materials you should look for, or is there a kind of a stressed or strength test that if it fails that you say, well, this could be caused by a deleterious material, and therefore we'll check for it? So, is there a list of deleterious materials the products should be tested for?
There are deleterious materials. Some of them are identified, but there's, as I was told by, there's hundreds of potential deleterious materials, so the standard can't identify them all. But so, sulfates, which is the common one we're talking about today, is identified.
And just for my lack of knowledge on this, sulfates include the likes of pyrite or pyrrhotite. They're classified as sulfurous materials, mica. And
not mica.
Not mica?
No.
Is mica on the list to test for?
No, it's not specifically identified.
Okay. Okay, and then my last question on this. When was the last... Sorry,
just on the mica. I suppose there are other ways of identifying the mica, so it's not called a mica test, but there are other ways, like there's the petrographer's report, the geologist's report, there's the percentage fines, because the control over the percentage fines, that's where the mica would be found. So there are other, they're not called mica tests, as I say, but there are other tests which establish if mica would be present. And then if there's an indicator, maybe you go to the next level, but there are definitely tests there around establishing those materials.
Okay, and there's a certain level of sulphur or deleterious material that's kind of acceptable to have. It's a naturally occurring, so there are levels there that are acceptable. Okay, and when was the last time that we saw concrete product in this country that was tested either from a quarry or a producer that contained levels above the acceptable standard for sulphurous materials? Does NSAI, when was the last time a producer, I'm aware that you cover 95 of these, and it could have been to somebody else. When was the last time you were notified of a product?
Well, as part of a manufacturer identifying a material to be used for the manufacture of concrete has to carry out tests on it. In carrying out those tests, if they identify that it's not suitable because of the level of sulphates, they won't use it. And that's what we're finding in our factory production control audits.
But do we then sort of run into a dead end of tracing back how did this end up in here? If they don't notify you, you're not aware of it. So then how do we ensure that chase back the supply chain here?
Well, we look to see that the material that they're manufacturing the blocks from conforms to EN 12620, which is aggregates for use in manufacture of concrete products. And that standard calls up a suite of tests that need to be carried out, and there's limits for various materials in that, or various that needs to be conformed to before they can use the aggregate to manufacture the block.
Okay, and so I'm just trying to give confidence to people out there that we have a whole range of safety nets here to stop this material ending up in people's homes. So just let me be clear in my head again. If somebody tests, or if somebody's product fails to meet the standard for sulphurous materials in it, they'll notify you of that, will they? They won't. They won't notify you of that. Okay. So then how do we know how that stuff got into the product that they've been testing and where it came from? You probably can't answer that because you're not aware of it. But,
no, but
is this a concern to anybody here? Because to me it's like, okay, we have a product that didn't meet standard because a deleterious material is present in it. Get rid of that. We don't have to tell anyone about it. Where did it come from in the first place?
Well, it's extracted from the quarry, and then that material is examined by a geologist, and there's testing carried out, and it is deemed not suitable for the manufacture of concrete products.
So who's the obligation on to then inform a geologist to go and test where our source product came from?
The manufacturer has to engage a professional geologist.
Deputy, I might be able to give some clarity on the role of the geologist.
I'm just trying to understand. I'm not trying to catch somebody out here. I'm trying to understand.
As Deputy O'Brien said, I'll treat you like leaving cert science
students.
Thank you. I'll put my teacher hat on because my teeth are grating at some of the slight things. So it's sulfides, not sulfates.
Great. Okay.
So sulfates have sulfates are SO4 ions that attach. So that's gypsum, which again, so the transition from sulfides to sulfates as the pyrite is the major pyrite problem. So sulfide transitions to a sulfate, which changes your calcium carbonate into gypsum, leads to swelling, and that's why we get the pyrite issue. If you're producing material to SR16, SR18, or SR21, it's incumbent on you to have a professional geologist look at your material. So they have to do what's called knowledge of the raw material, which is an assessment of the actual deposit. So that means going to the quarry, assessing the quarry, identifying heterogeneities perhaps within the quarry. So sometimes we see a quarry where there's one lithology at one side of the quarry and one lithology at the other side, and one might be suitable for concrete production, one might not be suitable for concrete production, and that should be reflected in the geologist's report. And then the second part of the geologist's report is a petrographic assessment of the product, which is the actual aggregate, so the crushed aggregate, and that would be your 40 mil, your 20 mil, your 10 mil, your fines content, or whatever is going to be put on the market for use in concrete for SR16 as an example. So that's where the role of the independent geologist comes in essentially. And there's, to fulfill that role, you must be essentially a chartered geologist, and for SR21 you must be on a specific register maintained by the Institute of Geologists of Ireland, which is the professional accreditation body, and that's available on their website.
Okay. So then again, forgive me if I get this wrong now again, but this product that has failed the test, the obligation is on the manufacturer to then go back and notify their source quarry, or the manufacturer has to get a geologist to go and check their source product?
The manufacturer has to get a geologist before they produce any aggregate that is going to be used in concrete products. So prior to a block being made, and once the rock goes into a block, I know nothing else about it, because it's once it's not being rock anymore, my expertise is done. So the geologist has to essentially come in and make a statement that this particular rock is suitable for use in concrete, or for use in subfloor fill, or for use in mortar, which are the three SR 16, 21 and 18.
So you're dependent on the quarry management skills there, because you said there could be one part of the quarry that is suitable for this product and doesn't contain, or contains levels that are okay. Another part of the quarry may not. So you're dependent very much on quarry management of their aggregates and fines and
their extraction plan should be informed by their geologist.
So in theory, you could have quarries that have this aggregate that may not be suitable for certain concrete products, and through mix-up or poor management or whatever it might be, quality control, it could end up in a product that some manufacturer then fails to meet standard. That's potential, that's possibility, is it?
I would imagine that would come back to the factory production control, that NSAI would ensure that their production process is robust enough to ensure that the correct material is going into the correct product.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Butler, you're trying to indicate to come in there.
Just the requirement for the geologist only came in 2016, just to be aware.
Okay.
As part of the standard recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Ó Broin, you want to come in next?
Yeah, thanks. Folks, again, thank you very much for giving us so much of your time, because it's certainly very instructive to ourselves. So I want to try and again focus back in on kind of inspection and enforcement. So as I understand our building control system, for example, for the building process, while the responsibility for compliance certificates lies with the developer, so it's not unlike how Eoin has described for the manufacturer to employ the geologist, we do have a level of independent inspections by our local authorities. When products are being certified by the NSAI, do you have the authority to independently inspect or lab test materials, or are you wholly dependent on the lab tests that are provided by the manufacturers? And if you have the power to independently inspect, do you use it? How often do you use it? And what does that reveal?
For these types of products, we only carry out a factory production control audit.
Would it be fair to say that that's kind of like almost like a paper audit of the systems that the manufacturer has in place?
Well, we ensure that the manufacturer has proper controls in place, that they're manufacturing a product of consistent quality, but it doesn't allow us to take samples and have them tested.
And you're saying that's a power that you don't have at all?
Not for this type of product. The construction product regulation has what they call an AVCP system, asset-based, we're getting into technicalities here, but it identifies 5 different classes of product essentially. These products fall under system 2+, they call it, and that's factory production control. So for that category of product, we can just we just do a factory production control audit. If it's 1+ or 1, say for cement manufacturer, for instance, we can have it tested.
So again, in plain English, for the one that you don't have the authority to do independent testing, what kinds of products would that cover?
Well, these types of products, aggregates, concrete blocks, structural steel, yeah.
So that means, for example, for any concrete block manufacturer, you don't have the capacity and don't undertake independent lab tests of the material. You're solely reliant on the tests that are provided by the manufacturer.
Yeah, we look at their testing, we look at their calibration of their equipment, all that type of thing, yeah.
Okay. And then in terms of the National Building Control Office, so when you become involved, for example, in the report into Donegal, I mean, are you able to secure independent lab tests of the materials, and to what extent does that give you visibility on what's happening?
I suppose really we can request information, like we can request a geologist report if it's depending on the products that they're selling, and we can take samples for testing.
So with respect then to the Donegal report, for example, of the quarries that were inspected, how many were independent tests requested by yourselves, independent lab tests or independent geologist examinations?
We actually tested all the blocks from all the manufacturers, and the GSI looked at the SR16, so the aggregates for concrete.
Okay. And when you say we tested, you would have secured independent lab tests for all of the material. And again, just because obviously the report was only published this morning, and it's quite a long report, so we all haven't got a chance to go through it. How many quarries were inspected for the Donegal report?
Just 17.
17.
17 that actually fall in under selling construction products, which were.
And how many is that? How many fall under that?
17.
17 quarries of how many? Could be several hundred?
Probably 30 or 40.
30 or 40? Yeah. Okay. Just in Donegal. And then, Richard, apologies, just in your exchange with Pádraig, Pádraig had a query around deleterious materials. And unfortunately, I didn't get to write down your response quickly enough. But you kind of indicated that your test wouldn't necessarily identify those. Did I understand that right?
On the finished block, yes, it wouldn't identify deleterious material, but in the SR16, it would.
Okay, so the work of the geologist would identify that, but not in the block itself. And is there a way, or is there a test that can identify deleterious materials once the block is actually manufactured, or is that something that can only be done at the geologist stage?
It's not part of the current EN standard for blocks.
It's not required?
It's not an essential characteristic, so
okay.
As a market surveillance, we can't investigate that.
You can't investigate it, even if you wanted to? I suppose the only reason I'm asking the question is just given there's been so much focus on defective block.
I might be able to clarify that as well. In this particular situation where the quarry that prompted the audit, as Deputy Mac Lochlainn requested, when we took a sample of the blocks, one of the questions was from which particular stockpile of material had this block been manufactured. Okay. And yes, we can essentially retro-engineer that. We can split it open and do a petrographic analysis on the sediment or the aggregate, and we can check which of the particular stockpiles. When the stockpiles are extremely distinct from each other, for example, you have maybe a quartzite and a volcanic rock, it's relatively simple to do.
No, that's really helpful. Yes, Sarah.
Actually, maybe John, let's just come in on that point, on linking up the aggregates and the concrete block.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so I suppose basically market surveillance will look at the essential characteristics that are prescribed in the Declaration of Performance, and I suppose we've produced a guide on that as well, like just to make it easier for manufacturers to understand, and also for end users, that there's particular performance limits that are set out in the standards that NSAI have produced, and those would generally be the performances that are required when choosing products suitable for their end use when they're brought into the buildings.
And then just go back to NSAI then. So while you can't do independent lab tests of the block, you can obviously do independent lab tests of the material that goes into the block, of the aggregates, etc. Is that correct? Do you have the authority to do that?
No, they're System 2 Plus products as well, so we wouldn't do independent tests of those.
Can you, or do you?
We can't under the CPR, no.
Okay. Because the only reason I'm asking that is just, if you take, for example, building control in Dublin City. So Dublin City Council now inspect about 100% of all multi-unit developments. They don't have to. The protocol requests about 15%. So you have a double check. You have the assigned certifiers, the design certifiers, but you also have the local authority. It would seem to me that in a preventative manner, if there was a capacity for the NSAI and the other notified bodies to at least have a capacity to do some independent inspections, that might be a very valuable thing. So I just make that as a comment. Feargal or Sarah, I'm really keen to understand the architecture of this, right? So if I get it right, the department is a notifying authority. It then, I suppose, appoints notified bodies. Feargal, I think you indicated there are 10 of those. I'd really like to know who they are, either at committee or by way of a note to committee afterwards, why we have 10, what the difference is between them. You also mentioned technical assessment bodies, and you might have said a number of 5. I'd be interested to know what's the relationship between those. And then, Mairéad, I'm particularly interested, just in terms of our building control authorities and yourselves, Sarah mentioned a figure of about 70 authorised officers. Just in terms of the capacity of our building control authorities, do they have enough staff? Do the staff, both in your own office and in the local authorities, have the kinds of technical expertise? Because I've met some building control officers and they're planners by profession or they're engineers by profession. They wouldn't have the geologist expertise. So, you know, it's not just about the numbers of staff, but do they have the technical competence to be able to carry out some of this building product surveillance work, which is very different from the, you know, the assessments of the building process itself. So maybe start with Mairéad and then go to Feargal and Sarah, if that's okay.
Authorised officer doesn't mean that you're competent to carry out market surveillance or an authorised for the purposes of building control. So it is a very technical area, and possibly just to answer, there would be very few that would be completely competent
in this particular area,
this particular field. Yeah, and it's something that we have part of the audit, the Quarries in Donegal, that we have recommended that there needs to be competency, capacity strengthening within the local authority sector and within our own office as well.
So first of all, you're indicating there isn't necessarily the skills or the competence. Is there the requisite number of staff? 70 sounds like a lot until you divide it among 31 local authorities, some of which have a significant amount of activity. Is that a sufficient number of people to undertake the work we're talking about?
Of those 70, some of them are planners, some of them are water engineers, some of them they may not be in building control. They may be doing there may be other professions. So the authorisation is given by the chief executives of each local authority, and many people have different authorisations for many pieces of legislation that they get automatically.
So how many full-time building control officers do we have in the local authority system? Is it less than 70 is what you're saying?
It's probably less than 70 for full-time. Like full-time for inspections, available for inspections that are competent to inspect.
Do we have a number?
I haven't a number offhand at the moment.
Maybe, Deputy, just to say, you know, as I said, we've been on a journey, and I think there's more to be done. The report in relation to Donegal calls out for more resources. There's commitments in the programme for government to examine the need to establish a National Building Control Authority to bring that level of expertise. It is clear that in the market surveillance there are particular technical skills. So there are questions about how best to aggregate those skills in the state. There's issues about retention of staff, employment of staff, and retention of staff in local authorities across all fields. So look, this is a challenging area. So look, we will be taking the recommendations of the report, looking at the programme for government and seeing what more needs to be done in this space. And in fact, the Housing for All review, which was published a few weeks ago, also points in this direction in terms of the National Building Control System. So look, that's it's something we're seeing in the report, and we're hearing in this room as well, and it's taken. In relation to, I'll let Sarah come in relation to notified bodies and technical assessment bodies and so on. But just to say, as Mairéad pointed out at the very beginning, this is a single market issue. So there's a whole area of EU law which is there to, I suppose, two things: facilitate the single market and the movement of goods, and then provide assurances to citizens across the EU that products that are purchased within the EU are safe and appropriate for use. So that's why some of the architecture and the terminology can sometimes sound a little bit clunky, because we're taking those EU structures and overlaying them on our own systems. But maybe Sarah, you might come in on that.
Yeah. Okay. So so the department is the notifying authority, and with INAB, the National Accreditation Board, we designate then notified bodies based on an application process. And up until probably 2019, NSAI were the only notified body in the country. In the context of Brexit, so I should also say that in the context of the CPR, a notified body can come from any member state. So a notified body in France could operate this factory production control for Irish companies as well. That's just a feature of, as Feargal says, the EU system. But those French notified bodies would have an equivalent designating body like ourselves, a notifying authority in France. So there is that sort of chain of you know, that there is a line of responsibility
sure.
back. Yeah, sorry, apologies.
And who are the 10 bodies then, Sarah?
So the 10 bodies then, so in the context of Brexit then, a number of Irish companies would have relied on notified bodies in the UK when they were in the EU. Since Brexit, a number of certification bodies that operated in the UK have established themselves in Ireland, have applied to us as notifying authority for that status within the EU, and that's why we've gone from 1 to 10 in a relatively short space of time.
And does that mean that they're responsible both for the setting of the standards and for the certification of the products?
No, it's pure. They're very, very, very clearly specified and narrowly specified functions. Whether it's factory production control, product testing, there are three different types and a combination of those two. So they're stipulated in the primary legislation, the CPR, and then in each standard, which is developed at Sinn level, at European level, it identifies the level of third-party intervention for each construction product. So that is contained within the standards. So Seán mentioned earlier about that it's System 2+ for concrete products and aggregates. It's actually unique in the standards for concrete blocks that there's a choice given to member states as to which level, either no third-party intervention or a 2+ intervention, which is factory production control. And Ireland Inc. have taken the option of that third-party intervention in a 2+ system, and that's embedded in our national provisions in the standard recommendation. So, but in general, that's set by Europe, and each member state then has to follow that.
Just going to say in relation to the European context, sorry, Sarah, that the experiences we're having in this really difficult space, as Deputy Mac Lochlainn pointed out, we'll actually be bringing that experience back to EU and feeding back into that SEM process in terms of saying, look, there are European standards which are applied right across the EU, which need to be adjusted because of the experiences we've been having in Ireland in this space, and the kind of research that we've been pointed to, that will be feedback. So we'll be sending our expertise back into at the EU level to improve standards right across the EU, not just here.
And our own staff in NSAI are actively involved in that CPR acquis process at the moment, and indeed the CPR is being reviewed at European level to strengthen the system. You asked about TABs, technical assessment bodies, and that's where construction products that aren't covered by a harmonised standard, but the manufacturer wants to label it with a CE mark. That's where technical assessment bodies come in, so non-standardised products. There is a facility to CE mark.
That's your question, so I'm going to go to Deputy Higgins and then Deputy O'Callaghan, but I can bring you back in again afterwards if you wish. Deputy Higgins, please.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to follow up on questions in relation to the Donegal quarries, and I suppose we're just at a bit of a disadvantage because the report was only published earlier today. I know it's 61 pages, including the quite hefty appendices, but I suppose all I've had time to look at in depth is what's been published on gov.ie. And it does clearly say that following receipt of a notification from NSAI of withdrawal of certification in October of last year, the Minister requested the National Building Control Market Surveillance Office, in partnership with Donegal County Council and Geological Survey Ireland, to carry out a market surveillance audit of all quarries in County Donegal. Was that the brief, or was it relevant economic operators, and how was that determined? Because the figures we're talking about here far in excess of the 17 and the 9 that are cited in the report.
It was concrete block manufacturers.
Or aggregate producers.
Yeah, or aggregate producers that were the subject of the audit.
So not all quarries in County Donegal. So that's
all quarries producing concrete blocks or aggregates.
Okay.
For construction for concrete products.
I think that should be clarified in the documentation that's out there in the public domain. Then, thanks for that information.
Deputy O'Callaghan, you want to come in next, please?
Thanks. Just a few short questions for National Building Control and Market Surveillance Office. So, just on the practice of people working in the construction industry, or indeed members of the public, contacting the Market Surveillance Office with concerns since you've been set up. Just can you give us an indication as to about how many people have done that, have raised kind of issues or complaints?
I wouldn't have a figure offhand, but we are consistently getting queries, complaints, and with regard to building control and market surveillance, and we identify them, we check it out, and we check the compliances. But it's quite consistent. We could probably have got 20 between the two of them in the last, a year really. Okay. But they're for different reasons. They could be in relation to construction of an apartment block or a one-off house or a product.
And just in terms of products, because that's what we're looking at now, just about how many of those have resulted in or ended in non-compliance issues being found in terms of products. And I'm not looking for the exact figure, but I'm just looking to get an indication on this as to whether or not that produces.
In relation to any issues, we got complaints on blocks. They were legacy block issues that were outside our scope.
Okay.
Anything we can deal with, we do deal with, but anything like that is outside our scope before 2013 or not being placed on the market at this moment in time.
Okay, so to date, since the office is set up, that hasn't produced issues in terms of market surveillance and products that you've been able to follow up on, or that there's been outcomes on?
We have followed up on items such as fire alarms and other products, similar type of products.
Yeah, thanks.
We have 35 product code areas and we have 450 harmonised standards that fall in under our remit.
Okay. And then just to return to the statements that were made by Aidan O'Connell to this committee earlier in the year, and just from your reply, you were saying they were thoroughly investigated, that no issues were found. That's correct, isn't it? Or, yeah. And so just want to get my head around, there's obviously a considerable gap between the statements he made, his direct experience, direct knowledge, which I assume were absolutely made in good faith, and then the outcome of your investigation. So I'm just trying to get a sense as to, have you any view as to why there could be such a gap between, a competent, experienced engineer and their direct experience and their view that defective materials from quarries have been going into homes recently, and your processes in terms of not finding any issues?
All I can say is that the particular economic operators he was referring to, we had investigation as part of our 2021 market surveillance campaign, and their products complied in full formal and technical compliances. And on foot of this committee deliberations, we went and we carried out market surveillance again, and we found that they were compliant. As such, I can't comment on anything prior to that. And as I said before, if anybody has any details, testing, anything else, they really should send it to us. We'll investigate it.
And so I'm just asking, just so we understand this and so we know this, does that mean there isn't a possibility that between testing, testing that you did as the previous campaign, subsequent testing, there isn't a possibility of defective materials being used between testing, or is that possibility very low, or what's the, are those testing processes robust enough that where there's a very strong view that defective materials are being used, that the testing process is sufficient to ensure that that isn't the case? Is that the...
As part of their factory production control process, they carry out continuous testing, and on those checks, they all looked, they were compliant.
Yeah, and continuous testing, can you just explain it to us a bit more?
There's for certain essential characteristics, there's weekly checks, monthly checks for others, half-yearly checks, then checking the constituent aggregate as well, the source, the constituent of the blocks as well. So it's all part of the factory production control process. And when the notified body would come and check that, they will check that as part of their intermittent audits.
And just a final question, just around testing and laboratory testing, and there was a well-publicised case in the UK in terms of fire cladding that was tested in a laboratory setting and was found to be compliant, but the conditions weren't real-world conditions, if you like. So once that fire cladding was exposed to wind conditions, the material then was found to be highly flammable, whereas in a laboratory controlled setting, it was meeting the test requirements in terms of being non-flammable. So just in terms of other materials and products in the laboratory testing, is there any risk around that the laboratory testing isn't matching real-world conditions in terms of, for example, some construction materials and ongoing and prolonged exposure to, wet conditions or anything else that might result in serious issues? Is that a possible issue, or are you satisfied that the laboratory testing is sufficient to safeguard against any real-world conditions that affect construction materials?
Yep. A construction product, as I've said, may comply with the requirements of the construction products regulations, but that does not mean it's fit for its intended use in the circumstances and the conditions in which it is to be used. For example, a block that might be suitable in West Wicklow with a nice fine climate, sunny southeast, may not be suitable in the most highly exposed area in Europe on the west of Ireland. And that goes for all products. And it is the designer's then responsibility to check the declaration of performance, to check the essential characteristics, and then check their circumstances and conditions that they're using it in. And they may have to adapt that product. They may have to look at how they will render that product, the external rendering, and they have to go back then to the RSR 325, which is the Bible for the construction of masonry construction in Ireland under Eurocode 6. So it can be fit, it can comply, but then you must look at it in use. That's the...
It's a performance and use test.
Yeah, it's performance and use test.
The fire test.
Yeah. So it can be that it meets the standards, gets through all the different processes, laboratory testing, certification, market surveillance office, all of that, but it can be the completely wrong product to use in a certain conditions. And so while we can take some reassurance that there's these standards and processes in place, that is not, that is a level of reassurance, but it's not the end of the story. If the products are used in conditions that are not suitable, then there's potentially very serious problems.
This is
fair.
That's why you need professionals involved in the building control, the building process, to check all of that.
Yeah.
And there are performance and use tests carried out on individual products and individual components and how they are constructed. And there are performance and use tests they've carried out for timber frame, where they've actually burnt the building and checked so these are all different. It's two different pieces of legislation. You have the construction product and then how it's used in construction.
And sorry, Chair, just to finish on this, can you just tell us a bit more about the performance and use tests? And I mean, does the Market Surveillance Office has no role in that? No. So who has a role in the oversight of performance and use tests? Or
that's the building control.
Building control, the local authority building.
That may be one of the compliance requests as part of construction type to demonstrate compliance, performance and use for a new product or a different type of product that may not have been tested in use before.
And the National Building Control Office then would have a role in that, or
building control, yeah.
Yeah, but is enough work put in? And it's a final question. But is there enough resources in that, enough oversight of that, or is that an area that needs more attention?
They may be subject that there are times when they go and they'll do an agreement certification system on it and carry out the test then and get an agreement cert, and that will demonstrate compliance then for performance and use for what they've actually tested it for. But if they use it in a different situation, then may not comply. So it's professional must check the end use, the circumstances and the conditions in which it has to be used.
Thank you.
I suppose as a Market Surveillance Authority and the National Building Control, we have the advantage of seeing products being manufactured and certified and then actually going onto site and being built. And we provide training to all the building control authorities, and we run annual CPD days that even for all the external experts too, that's not building control professionals, can actually view, and we're basically there to inform the sector and educate the sector.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Deputy O'Brien and Deputy Mac Lochlainn, you're going to share the last slot there, so fire away.
Yeah, it's going to split time, 5 minutes each roughly. So just in relation to there's 180 registered quarries in Donegal. You've audited 17, and the reason why is that they're the 17 quarries that are related to the manufacture of concrete blocks. But there's 180 quarries in Donegal. So just to be clear, you've done an audit on less than 10%. Is that fair to say? Yeah. Is that correct?
We only carry out market surveillance on economic operators that produce construction products.
Okay, but it's just important for the that there's not an audit of. There's a perception that all quarries in Donegal were audited. There's 180 quarries in Donegal. 17 were audited for the reasons that you've explained. I just want that on the record. Now, can I just ask this question again? The quarry that was responsible for the vast majority of defective concrete blocks in Donegal, was that quarry audited as part of the 17? Was that quarry one of the 17 quarries that was audited? And I prefer not to name them, but I think you know who I'm referring to. Can only be.
They were actually sampled, tested, but they're actually not producing blocks anymore.
Okay.
Right.
They were sampled, but were they one of the 17 quarries that were audited?
Yes.
They are one of the 17. Okay, that's important. So that's clear. They were one of the 17 that were audited. Now, in terms of the EN 12620, there's the SR16 process. Okay. Now, under that SR16 process, there's a geological and petrographic assessment required. And that's required on an ongoing basis. So once you have the first assessment, I think it's every 3 years then. I want to be clear, in terms of the 17 quarries that you looked at, did you examine the geological and petrographic assessments for each one? Was that looked at, including the one that I'm most concerned about?
Yeah, I guess that's one for us, Deputy. Yes, we did. That was the first thing we do. So we have essentially a methodology for when we're looking at quarries when we're requested to provide technical assistance. The first thing we do is we look for the geologist's report, and we'll go through that and evaluate it essentially to see does it make sense? Does it reflect what we know about the geology based off our own mapping of our aggregate potential products? And then, based on that, we'll assign a priority for inspection to a particular quarry. So one of the things we'll be looking for example, would there be caveats in the geologist's report? So does the geologist identify it as a significantly variable lithology, or does the geologist identify areas that would be of trouble. And if that's the case, then that would be somewhere which obviously is of higher priority for a visit than someplace where the geologist says this is consistently the same material across the geology.
There is a profound concern in Donegal that the geological and petrographic assessment that would have been carried out for the quarry that we're most concerned about needs to be re-evaluated and assessed. Like, are you happy now that that particular quarry, from a geological and petrographic perspective, has a clean bill of health at this point, or do you feel it needs further examination?
Well, we haven't got access specifically as an inspection to that quarry. It was closed anytime we visited it, so we're not aware that it is currently producing material. So that was our brief, was to follow up on on facilities that are currently producing. Okay,
this is a question for Feargal Coighligh, right? We're talking about a quarry here that sadly is the source of the vast majority of the defective concrete blocks, thousands of public and private buildings, and nobody can tell me today if there has been an independent examination from a geological and petrographic perspective of whether that's. Nobody can give. Is that? Am I right in saying that as we speak here today in the year, almost the year 2023, that we don't have that? Is that fair to say?
Deborah, I'm not aware of in terms of the past history we're dealing with. In terms of the discussion today, was on the generality of the system now in place, and in terms of reporting on the audit.
But I'll phrase it like this: because you can't give me assurance, will you assure this committee that you will now, following today, the Minister order an urgent examination of this particular quarry in terms of the geological and petrographic assessment that had been carried out, that be independently, urgently examined, including getting access to that quarry to do that? That's the least of the thousands of people that are affected, but absolutely life's destroyed here. One of the biggest scandals in the history of the state. Surely that assurance can be given. If it hasn't been done already, will you give an assurance it will be done after today?
The department has to operate within, in terms of the regulations that are laid down. We're talking about placing products on the market and the standards which operate, and we will operate within that. In terms of going into a non-producer, I can't comment. We probably need to take advice on that. Okay. But we'll consider.
Can you revert back to the committee when you get that advice?
We weren't. The topic of discussion today is not.
No, that's fair
specifics.
Enough. But that's fair enough. And I'm not trying to. You appreciate what I'm trying to do here is try to get assurances for people that we will learn the lessons of what led to this disaster and make sure they don't happen again. So I just ask that when you get that advice, will you revert back to the committee and what action can be taken? Is that fair enough?
We'll come back to the committee, but just to say, I mean, our experience in pyrite and defective departments and the mica issue has led to huge transformation and improvement. As we can see, the work today on the NSAI and the National Market Surveillance Office and the good work that's been done and the standards that we can now stand over, and the recommendations that there is further investment and training and resources needed in this space. So it's all part of that continuous journey.
But you will revert back around the particular quarry that left the vast majority of homes the way they are.
We'll report back.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for your patience with us. Feargal, I will say there are some of us who, while we acknowledge a lot has changed, there are also things that haven't changed. And while it's slightly tangential to today's discussion, I have a very large building in my own constituency. It has been fully occupied without a single completion certificate for many, many years. And there doesn't seem to be any prospect of enforcement action or prosecution on the building control aspect of this 48-unit apartment. It's still finding out a planning retention issue. But that suggests to me that notwithstanding the significant changes, both in terms of building control amendment regulations and the other things we're discussing, there still is significant opportunities, and it could be a very small number of individuals or companies who, if they want to break the rules, face very, very little consequence of those. And I just want to make that point because it shouldn't be lost. Rather than in back and forth questions, Chair, I think there's a couple of bits of information that would be great if the information could be provided to the committee from whichever organisation can do that. I do think it would be really good for this committee to be able to know how many full-time equivalent building control officers we have in the state. I just think that would be a helpful thing for us to know in our deliberations. And I'd also be interested to know, given so many of our building control officers are planners, engineers, sometimes roads engineers, etc., is there any sense in which what the skills deficit in the kinds of specialisms that would be required to make some of the judgment calls and inspections for building product surveillance, some sense of what that deficit is like, if that's possible? I also think the committee, it would be good if somebody could share with us the total number of products that have been withdrawn. If it's possible to have a list of those, that would be even better. And if some of those have been reintroduced following re-compliance, that would be useful. Just for the NSAI, and look, I fully understand that the review of IS 465 has to be evidence-based and science-based. I accept that. And I've raised this previously with the Minister, given the very large volumes of applications in the current scheme that are currently stuck in stage 1 and can't progress to stage 2 because of what we understand are conflicts between the standard and the engineers' reports, that proposition of interim technical guidance would be enormously helpful both to the local authority as well as to families. I know that also has to be grounded in science and evidence, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility that if we're looking at a timeline of 2024 for the review of IS 465, that it would be reasonable, if possible, for the NSAI to prioritise those interim technical guidance notes for the local authority. Otherwise, there's about 500 or 600 applications just stuck, right? They're just going nowhere. And our understanding from talking to engineers and officials is that interim technical guidance could unstick a lot of those and potentially move them into stage 2. That would be enormously important because obviously we're eagerly awaiting the department's regulations in terms of the enhanced scheme. So that should lead to a significant increase in applications. If we have the same ratio of applications stuck before they progress, this could become a very big issue. So I'm not looking at a comment on that, Geraldine, but just to emphasise the importance of that. Feargal, maybe the last question I'll give to you is, it would be great to get an update on those regulations for the new scheme. I know it's slightly stretching the scope of this discussion, but they were meant to be ready at the end of this year. Will they be ready at the end of this year, or are they likely to slip into next year? And then, Mairéad, a final question for you. How does a building control official know whether a block that's fully compliant with the standard and is certified by NSAI can be used in one climate and not in another? Are there technical guidance documents, for example, under the Building Control Amendment regulations that set that out very clearly, or is it something that they acquire? Because there's one thing to have a standard and the block meets the standard and the paperwork proves that. But building control officers, and of course that's even if they are inspecting those buildings, whether they're one-offs or estate builds, is that something that's set out in the technical guidance documents, or is that something that needs to be revisited so that our building control officials actually have the competence to make those kind of judgment calls?
In construction, you have different building components in construction, and the components then, say if you have using a concrete block, you need to check the declaration of performance, the essential characteristics, and check to see the suitability for the particular wind-driven rain index and weather in the location you're putting it in. But it is also then dependent then on the render, the exterior render that you will put on that as well. So there's a couple of things in play here. You won't know anything by just looking at a block. You'll have to check the declaration performance, CE markings, and the safety information.
But in terms of that very specific issue which you raised, which I thought was very important, that even when you check all of that, a block that meets the standard may not be fit for purpose for use in certain locations or certain buildings. Is that set out for building control officers and technical guidance documents, or
SR 325, everything is in it. It's the Bible.
Okay.
Neary, you want to come in?
No, just to support Mairéad and what she's saying, and I think we probably would have talked about this before, that in order to get a building right, you need the right products, you need the right design, and you need the right workmanship. And the building regulations, I suppose, set standards around performances for buildings, and that affects both the design and the construction aspect of it and the products used. The technical guidance documents then, in some situations, they give specific, explicit guidance for non-complex buildings, and they also refer out to standards. And as Mairéad mentioned, SR 325 is really it's the Irish provisions for the use of masonry construction, which it really is the Irish guide to using the Euro codes, which again apply all over Europe for masonry construction. And in 325, there's areas around durability, and that durability ties back into the product and the aggregates that go into the product. So everything, I suppose, comes together in 325, which is a standard published by NSAI, and then the regulations rely on that.
And in terms of the regs for the enhanced scheme, I can test your patience, Feargal.
Yeah, they're not on my side of the house, so we'll have to come back to you on
Okay, and maybe again, as with the other two questions on the full-time equivalents and the withdrawn products, if maybe a communication could be given to the committee, because I think all committee members would be interested to know. I mean, if they're not going to be ready this year, which we suspect or not, it would be good to know what the revised timeline for their approval by the minister would be.
Thank you, Deputy Bryn. And just to clarify who's coming back with what, the question on how many full-time equivalents building control officers, are these all departmental? The department can supply the answers to these? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. And
the same on products withdrawn, because that's a function of the minister, isn't it?
Total number of products withdrawn then as well, is that?
Well, yeah, between the NBCO and ourselves, really.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I don't have anybody else indicating to ask any further questions. So it just leaves me to thank you for your time today. And when I said at the start it was complex and technical, I sure wasn't lying. So it is quite difficult, and I do thank you for your patience and for your expertise and your assistance to us in improving what we understand of the system. And I note your comments as well, Mr. Coighligh, about the improvements that have been made and the ongoing improvements that are continuing and continuous monitoring that's going on. And I think that will give some sort of reassurance to the public who are watching out there that lessons from the past have been learned, and there is a rigorous regulation and testing and inspection and continuous improvement in place. So thank you very much. Sulfite.
Very much. Thanks, yes. Yeah, I could do a few in my life, but more. Yeah.
So thank you very much for your time. I'm going to adjourn now until Thursday the 8th of December at 1:30 p.m.